The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Indiana.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume. I have a very simple amendment. Actually, what it does is just says, if Congress doesn't authorize specifically funds for UN, which should be part of our process, these agencies shouldn't be funded and projects that UN is doing. I probably could defund the whole UN, but I'll take a much smaller steps and say Congress needs to do its job. If it's not authorized, that's a process that Congress should follow, that shouldn't be funded. And I know that that's not a problem of Appropriations Committee. Authorization Committee didn't do a job, but if they didn't do a job, then they should start doing the job. So I think the process is broken, and we need to start dealing with corrupt agencies as UN, and I reserve.
The gentlewoman yields. For what purpose? Oh, the gentlewoman reserves. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I claim the time in opposition.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
I rise in strong opposition to this amendment. The bill, as it stands, already cuts 83% of the contributions to international organizations' account compared to fiscal year 24 and excludes funding for our treaty obligations as well as the majority of UN organizations that we traditionally fund. We have watched as the PRC challenges the U.S. at the UN and other multilateral institutions, working to insert their values of authoritarianism and disrespect for human rights. By cutting off funding to the UN and its agencies, this bill leaves a void for our adversaries to fill. Let me give you one example of the devastating effect of this amendment. In 2023, the U.S. was the largest contributor to UNICEF's core resources. It's this consistent funding that has enabled UNICEF and partners to reduce under 5 childhood mortality by more than half since the year 2000, and more children are surviving today than ever before. This support could end. The UN is not perfect. No large bureaucracy is. But our ability to improve its operations, make sure its stances reflect our values, and have the UN serve its mission for peace hinges on the U.S. being an active participating member of that organization. I fully support the authorization of these entities, but we all know that will not happen overnight. While we work towards that goal, we cannot cut off participation and support. I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from Indiana was recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think my colleague is not representing the amendment very correct. This amendment not defund full UN, which we probably should, considering what's happening. It just defines programs that we did not explicitly authorize, and Congress should be doing its job. But let's talk about UNICEF. UNICEF not long ago admitted shortcomings in its humanitarian support to children who alleged that they were raped and sexually abused by peacekeepers in Central African Republic. This is the same UN agency where 20 UN employees were alleged participating in Hamas attack. Where just recently, one of the U.S. agencies, their staff whistleblower alleged large sums are being lost to corruption in Iraq as donors fail to track spending on 1.5 billion aid projects were sought. Roughly $500 million funded by taxpayers' fund from the United States. And the employees actually saying it's not just this culture is fueled and culture of bribery and corruption is fueled by UN. It's also this culture and funds being spent on large UN overheads and really don't even get to the people. And I've been on the ground a lot, and I'll be honest with you, our allies around the world are laughing that we're giving money to corrupt organizations that are controlled by Russia and China and work most of the time against American interests and doesn't help really the people. I've been in war zones, including like in Ukraine, including in the Middle East, in Africa. You haven't seen them. You come them in fancy hotels with fancy cars, where the executives showed up for picture op with congressional delegations, and people are suffering and dying, and American consumers and Americans are paying large money and borrowed debt of our grandchildren to make some of the very wealthy and corrupt. I think this is embarrassing for us, the Congress. We don't take our job seriously, start looking at these agencies and looking at the corruption within these agencies. And I think this is something that we have to take way more seriously, and we should not have a blank checks to corrupt organizations like UN. And we need to do our job. So I truly believe we should really send the message that Americans are not stupid, we're not going to be taken advantage of, and Congress is not stupid. We actually will start looking at these programs, authorizing them, and see what's really happening on the ground if we really want to achieve results, and our adversaries are not going to be laughing at us and our allies. I'll be honest with you, most of our allies saying we are not going to be giving money to these corrupt organizations like UN. And I think Congress needs to take seriously, and I reserve.
And I do want to remind members to address their remarks to the chair. The gentlewoman from New York.
As mentioned before, our participation is in the United States' interest. I oppose this amendment. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentlewoman from Indiana is recognized.
I think, Madam Speaker, I think in our national interest is to make sure that taxpayers' funds are really achieving goals in our best interest. And unfortunately, organizations like UN being corrupt and actually sabotage and diminish and work against our national interests around the world and make a lot of wealthy people who are not our friends very wealthy. And we have now the serious situation in our country in serious debt and inflation that is becoming national security issues. And I urge my colleagues to become stronger and start challenging the corruption and not to be afraid to challenge the status quo. It's the right thing to do. That's why people elect us here. And I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Speaker, I guess under the current version of the bill, Americans should feel better that Congress will be authorizing to spy on them only for 2 years, not for 5. But I really want to bring up some other issues that really at the essence of this bill, that the bill is not addressing. So we've been talking about warrant, which is extremely important. This is a search, so government is able to search without warrant. That is violation of First Amendment. It's unconstitutional. But on top of it, when we're talking about lawfully collected information, in reality, it could be very unlawful information there. We do not know. It's never addressed. And we know for a fact that government unlawfully collected information in 2016. We know the government acknowledged that they have a lot of data there. They don't know how much. It could be, they call it all incidental. But nothing in this bill addressing actually if this is for lawfully collected information. There is no auditing, no checking. And they want us to trust. So if we pass with a warrant, at least we will have a warrant to potentially, search unlawfully collected information. But if this bill passes as it is, Congress will be authorizing for 2 years for government to have unconstitutional searches of unlawfully collected information. It almost sounds ironical for us, an institution that should be protecting the constitutional rights of Americans. So I hope my colleagues are paying attention what we'll be voting for on both sides of the aisle, and I hope Congress will wake up to start protecting the American people, not playing circuses here. Thank you. I yield back.
He yields back. Shall be considered as adopted, and the bill, as amended, shall be considered as read. No further amendment to the bill as amended is in order except those printed in Part B of House Report 118-466. Each such further amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report by a member designated in the report. Shall be considered read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. It is now in order to consider the Amendment 1 printed in Part B of House Report 118-466. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-466, offered by Mrs. Spartz of Indiana.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1160, the gentlewoman from Indiana, Ms. Spartz, and a member opposed shall each control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume. I have held a very principled position on Ukraine, and unfortunately, this position is not very shared with a lot of people in Congress. It's unfortunately, we have the false choice of either saying that Ukraine doesn't matter to America or support Ukraine with no question asked, with blank checks. And both these positions are not good in our national interest, and both of these positions are not good in the interest of the people of Ukraine. And unfortunately, this monopoly of narratives prevailing in our government, in our society, and in Congress. So my amendment is actually very simple. And I know this is just, we're doing this amendment just for the show, and no one is going to pass anything on the floor. We still will go with blank checks and slush funds. And unfortunately, this strategy failed the American people. President Biden failed the American people on the border, on national security. Congress failed the American people on the border, on national security. President Biden and President Zelensky failed the Ukrainian people. They were not ready before the war started. They didn't have good strategy when the war started, slow-walked the aid, and really didn't fight and deter Putin to go further. And now we have a very significant war in Europe. And I said, unfortunately, this supplemental doesn't just have a lethal aid. It's had other parts, and they will go further. And unfortunately, no one is going to be taking our amendments. So because we have presentations and circuses, but decisions already made. So my amendment is actually very simple. It just says we shouldn't have blank check and let President Biden have presidential drawdowns increase from 100 million to 8 billion, including loans from 4 to 8 billion. So we generally given true blank check to President Biden of $16 billion. Congress forgot, that we should do our jobs. We shouldn't create these loopholes for presidents, doesn't matter who the president is, to be able to do what they want to do. This is our job to oversee these funds. So very simple amendment. This emergency that we created now go to the point where giving billions of dollars Congress and not doing its job. We have the power of the purse for a reason. So all it does, this amendment, it eliminates 4 sections that increasing, and it's a true blank check. Because when we say that presidential drawdown goes from 100 million to 8 billion almost, or from 200 to 400 million, from 25 to 50 million, we really don't even know what he's going to do. He can do whatever he wants with that. And that is a big problem, because these emergencies are dangerous, but also, what the problem we have right now, that in case of these emergencies, we actually don't have ability even to ask the questions, and Congress hasn't been asking questions. That's why we have such a major catastrophe around the world, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's Ukraine, and that's why China, Russia, and Iran are moving, and we're doing a lot of presentation with blank checks and slush funds and no policies. And so I would urge my colleagues to think maybe for a change and give this amendment consideration, which I have a very low expectations. And I also would consider, as I said, to supporting lethal aid with border security. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. And it's sad for me to see that we still don't take this war as serious as we should be, because generally only 13.7 billion actually go to security assistance directly to Ukraine. From this 60 billion plus another 8 billion slush fund. So we're talking almost $70 billion plus another 8 billion of loans, whoever they go to. So we're talking about almost 80. So I have a problem with that, and I reserve.
Woman reserves. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Connecticut?
Mr. Chair, I claim time in opposition to this amendment.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
This war is an existential conflict for Ukraine. As important, it is a test for the United States and the United States leadership. One of the best tools we have to get the Ukrainians what they need is presidential drawdown authority. This allows the United States to send equipment from our stocks to the front line in a matter of days. There isn't time to delay. This amendment would cut that authority from $7.8 billion to $100 million. It ties our hands, and yes, it hamstrings the Ukrainian military to do the job that they need to do to defeat Putin. We all lose if Ukraine succumbs to Putin's ambitions, and it will not stop there. Putin in 2016 asserted that Russia's borders do not end, and this is a quote, do not end anywhere. Russian officials just this spring have threatened Finland, Romania, Armenia, Estonia, Lithuania, and Moldova, removing the best tool that the United States has to exercise in terms of a moral clarity and responsibility, that we can move quickly to arm our allies would be a grave mistake. Please vote no on this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlelady yielded back. The gentlelady
How much time do I have
India.
remaining?
Gentleman has 30 seconds.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to highlight we are increasing blank check from 100 million to 8 billion, and we don't even know if it's spent for Ukraine or not. Just a blank check of 16 billion to President Biden, purely blank check. And I hope that my colleagues will support that, because we need to stop slush fund and blank checks. We will never win against aggressors if we continue Congress not do its job. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Indiana. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
I request a recorded vote.
What purpose does the gentlelady from Indiana seek recognition?
I request yeas and nays.
Do you request a recorded vote?
Recorded vote.
Okay, so pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Indiana will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 2, printed in Part B of House Report 118-466. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-466, offered by Ms. Green of Georgia.
Pursuant to House Resolution 11.